Peek behind the curtain of the Softly Training Lab with the Softly Performance podcast. The pinnacle of human performance is out there, and we intend to find it.
All right, greetings and salutations. Welcome to the next episode of the Softly Performance podcast with me, Coach Matt. I'm your host, Coach G. And today we're talking about, well, prior to the record, here we go, I'm about to cough again. I don't know, man. I don't know what's going on.
Is it that dry Arizona heat?
Yeah, apparently. But we're talking about whether or not, what's the criteria or the selection methods that we must take into account when deciding on continuous education. Now, when I was in the military, I didn't know that was a thing. It wasn't relevant for my, let's say, domain of expertise, because the Marine Corps was telling me, or at least it was clearly drawn out, these are the courses that you need to take. What I'm talking about, to be simplistic, if you're in the military and you're a door kicker, do you sign up for Haley Strategic, Sage Dynamics, whatever firearms course to be better at your job? I think it's definitely done on the regular, particularly at higher levels. But I'm bringing this up because Matt and I also have to make this decision, not necessarily firearm manipulation, but continuous education for coaches, whether or not it is worth the time.
And just if you're not aware, sorry to cut you off, G. Within the kind of the coaching world, particularly in the States, where most people, I would say, please correct me if I'm wrong, G, are kind of governed by the NSCA, the National Strength and Conditioning Association, and they have a number of different certifications depending on what your kind of your speciality is within this world. And in order to maintain accreditation, in order to maintain your currency, if you like, are they 2-year cycles here? I have this in the UKSCA, like I have to run them both, so I'm like forever mixed up.
Oh wow, really?
Yeah. So obviously we have to have first aid, so we have to have like an up-to-date first aid credential, which makes a lot of sense. And we also have to file professional development hours, so we have to show that over the cycle of the year or the 2 years we've kind of kept up to date with best practice, with kind of new research, new thinking that's sort of come out. And there's a few different ways you can kind of get those points, but one of which, as G is talking about, is by going on CPD, continuous professional development courses or events. So yeah, just in just the same way that like a doctor or a nurse has to maintain currency in their field, that's kind of the model that the NSCA or the strength and conditioning kind of industry follows. Just to give you guys some context.
Yeah, and it's something that I think it's dangerous not to. The reason these continuous education courses exist is because you can get comfortable. You know, for me, if you told me, hey, Giovani, we're sending you guys from North Carolina, I already have some assumptions and expectations as far as what I'm going to see based on my past experience. So it is with continuous education. You told me, hey, Giovani, TSAC's coming up. I already kind of have in mind, and I'm going, by the way, listener, if you're going to be there.
That's the Tactical Strength and Conditioning Association. Like the NSCA's kind of sub-arm of quote-unquote tactical. They run like an annual training conference, normally in the summer. Is it always in the summer?
August.
August.
Well, it's been every time I've gone
in
August. But I'll be going there. And I'm bringing this up because at some point, as far as your expertise and the level of experience that you have in the field, it starts to get a little muddy as far as whether or not it's worth the time. For me, I can say with general faith that most of the lectures that are going to be presented, I already have been exposed to at some point, because if you're doing your job, you should know about this stuff before it hits the ground, so to speak. There shouldn't be anything it's not 1980 where that's the main source of information. We have the internet now, so generally speaking, education is a lot more accessible. So for me, there's more of the, let's say, soft power comes to mind as far as, I don't want to say I'm networking because that makes me sound like I'm a hustler, but rather I'm going there to foster relationships, to meet other practitioners in this space, because I really appreciate the conversations that happen between the lines, so to speak, that didn't make it on the slide. I want to know about the real day-to-day. So Matt, you talked about that as far as like being presented theory and lecture, etc., versus practical application. There's also that aspect too, practical application. For me, I always value, well, firstly, person that is comfortable with practical application should be buttressed by a strong foundation of theory. I'll call this out. Like Haley Strategic has a bad rap sometimes because they will pontificate and talk a lot about, let's say, the science of marksmanship and biomechanics. And so many people, thinking of Goodhart's law, what's the most important thing, rather value time on target, which makes sense. Like, okay, well, does all this pontification, does all this theory make matter when the most important thing is getting on target. And I really appreciate Haley Strategic in that all they're trying to do is share this knowledge. The practical application piece matters the most, but if you care about the knowledge, it's there. Anyway, I say all that because if you're trying to decide on whether or not a course is worth your time, should you spend your own money, I would say, will you get a return on your investment? That can be monetary. For Matt and I, if I go pay $2,000 for a continuous education course, am I going to get, let's say, 10% profit from that? 10% net? In retail space, 10% is a very narrow margin. I know in the marksmanship industry, if I was an armorer selling a pistol, I expect to make 10% markup on a new pistol. And then for service related, it goes like 50% and beyond profit. So it's easy for me to look at that course as like, am I going to make 50% more? Oftentimes the answer is no.
So how would you, sorry, Jay, again, don't want to cut you off, but just on that as a coach, like as a private coach, how are you measuring that, I guess? So when you say about like making a financial return on investment, is that like with this added expertise, I can charge more per athlete, per client, or does it open up a new avenue of clients? Like how are you kind of, I've never been exposed to that. So.
Yeah, that's where my head is at, is like I can charge more per client.
Right.
Because adding more onto my books, adding more clients, unless I'm signing up for a business development course, then that makes sense, right? But I'm not trying to add more clients to my book of business. Rather, I'm trying to improve the quality of service that I deliver.
Sure, that makes sense.
I would rather coach 5 people and charge buku bucks than 10 people and charge a reasonable rate. That's less work for me, and they're happier. I want to be that concierge level 4-star.
Back to your ranch. It's cool. It's calling you.
Canyon Ranch, yeah. Hey, by the way, I'm still here, okay? I'm not a clone. This is Giovani Urrutia of Sound Mind and Body.
Yeah.
Dude, I really had a blast talking about that experience. And then working with those people. But anyway, I digress. So there is also the qualitative aspect, the qualitative benefit. For me, as far as the criterion on whether or not I take a course, is the information accessible through other means? Is this something that is difficult to find on my own? So, for example, Bartholomew, Art of Coaching, we were just talking about him. His stuff is very, let's say, soft science. I don't want to say people skills. That's really underselling it, but very much focused on relationship and communication. That's of more value to me than, let's say, strength and conditioning at this point. Because strength and conditioning... I was
just going to say, it's at this point, isn't it? That's the key. Like when you think how long you've been doing this.
Yes. So now I'm at the point, Matt, I'm sure you're the same way, where I sit down on a lecture, I'm like, okay, I'm nodding my head because, this is what I've been doing. If I go into an NSCA conference today and I'm sitting there, I'm like having my mind fucking blown and exploded, that's not to say I'm bad at my job. It's just meaning that I'm not there yet. A friend of mine, and this is just good life advice. A friend of mine says you can tell how much someone has experience in their particular field by what they're reading. So meaning I do read strength and conditioning stuff on the regular as I see it as part of my job. But most of my time is reading stuff that is not specifically related to strength and conditioning because I should already know how to fucking do that after 12 years.
Yeah, kind of.
But
I see that.
But Matt, you and I would agree, like, not to say that there isn't anything new being written. That's why we read. Like, I'll give you a great example of where I'm a bit jaded as far as continuous education. As you know, Matt, so listeners, hypertrophy or muscle mass increase is driven by mechanical tension and muscular failure. It need not matter how you get there. So you can do so through volume, you can do so through intensity. So amount of reps you're doing versus the amount of weight you're pushing. As long as you reach a point of muscular tension and muscular failure, then you should get growth signaling for hypertrophy. Now, the thing that's frustrating about that, people are talking about it like it's new. Dude, you're going to get bigger regardless. That's the thing that's frustrating. Like, I saw this great chart showing, like, strength, and these are themes, strength, power, hypertrophy, and showing the rep ranges and intensities, and how, for hypertrophy, that adaptation was bigger with the hypertrophy program, which makes sense. That was our previous convention, what we understood. And then the new chart was showing hypertrophy was even across the spectrum. It was like, yeah, move weight. Who knew, right? So that's the thing. It's been kind of like all that did was added color, but I already know how to get you bigger. It's not like I would say for people that are fucking married to a method, meaning like there's a coach at the gym that I rent space out at, and he's got a guy who's clearly a body comp athlete, very low training age. He's like he's way overweight. I could tell he drinks just based on his body shape. And the guy's got him doing Westside barbell board presses but he's body comp dude. I'm like, board presses? Really? For reps? Dude, just have him on the fucking treadmill, man. What are you doing? So for somebody like that, where I say, where if I tell them, hey, hypertrophy will happen regardless, all we need but do is chase muscular failure, you get to choose how you get there. Like, that's going to blow his fucking mind, because apparently he hasn't learned anything past Louis, which Louis is awesome, but come on.
Yeah.
So, Matt, what are your thoughts there? And by the way, we're bringing this up because I'm not expecting any one of you, unless you're in the field, to go to one of these courses. But rather, this is for, again, if you're a military service member, you're a firefighter, like, do I take X course? Well, firefighters, like, I know a firefighter who took Wim Hof, and he's certified through Wim Hof. Like, that is giving him, he's actually built a business off of that, and he's helping his fellow men and women to his left and right as far as breath work. Like, that was a clear return on his investment. So, Matt, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I guess kind of fairly similar, and I agree. I think a lot of this stuff it goes wider and deeper than just us bitching and whining about how we have to spend money to accrue accreditation points. But one thing again, I guess this comes from being old, that I'm starting to see in strength and conditioning is the cyclical nature of it.
Oh my goodness, yes.
I mean, again, this is how cool I am. I was listening to, I have a lot of BBC News on, and they were talking about how I think it was a fashion-based study. They'd used machine learning to like look at kind of fashions over, like as in clothing fashions over the last maybe 100, 150 years. And they were saying that there's like a really positive signal that fashions are on like a 20-year cycle. And it's kind of well, no shit, we kind of knew that. You can kind of see that. But like there's kind of, I guess, relatively objective data backing that up now. And I think obviously that runs across in a lot of what we do as humans. There's that sort of trying to push back against what the generation before did, because obviously we're way better than our parents. We're way better than the kind of the guys and girls that we're working for. But then like as you progress through, you sort of go back and look at what some of those people were doing and maybe read that stuff with fresh eyes. Based on the knowledge you've accrued to that point, you interpret it differently to maybe how you'd have done it when you first encountered that information. So as an example, within kind of strength and conditioning, isometrics was kind of all the rage in the 1950s as a like kind of health, as a strengthening thing. Like it was huge. And it kind of fell out of favor. And then if you look sort of the last 10, 15 years, it's right back in, but we're doing it slightly differently, a slightly different kind of takes on it. So where I was going to go with that is I wonder whether that will start to be the same in things like tactics. So when you look at, be that fireground tactics or be that kind of law enforcement stuff. Now I know for fire, obviously the kind of the scenes are changing, like because vehicles change and house structures and building materials change. So I know that the specifics are going to be different and are going to keep evolving. But it would be interesting to know if you see the same kind of cyclical big picture stuff.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I don't know enough about that.
John Daly's been on the block for a long time, so he's not the only one. I would wonder from a marksmanship standpoint what that's like as far as the change. I think you're right. The fundamentals don't change.
Yeah.
And it's the seasoning that does.
Yeah, for sure. Do you have... Sorry, you go.
I was just going to say, like, trends, and you're right. Like, and that makes me feel old. I watched Dan Paff speak, and he talked about, and this was early on in my career, like first couple of years, he's like, I've been in the game long enough to know, like, to see the cycle, and we're coming back on breathing again. And, like, it was PRI was, like, very hot at the time.
Yeah.
And it just, that pops in my head on a weekly basis, like, oh, shit, man, it's happening to me now. Where I see on social media, I want to say 2 months ago, social media was kind of trending with pelvic on femoral rotation.
Okay.
And loaded hip airplanes. Like Vernon was doing that for months or years even prior to that. And then me too. Like if you look at my social media feed, I've been doing that for years, but now it's in vogue again. And then this month, it's about T-spine rotation. And again, you go back in my feed, I've been doing that for years, but now it's like, ooh, T-spine rotation. Are you doing it with power? And like, what the fuck? Yes! Swing a fucking baseball bat. Like, what the fuck? Like, why is this new?
So I've got an old man question, then I guess. So I'm not really plugged in at all on social media. Are they kind of these trend cycles? Are they getting faster? Are things kind of in vogue for less time? Are you seeing anything like that?
I think you're right about that, because we have to recognize with social media, it's not about accuracy; it's about engagement. So I think you're right. And I think
because you kind of have to, Like you have to always be looking for the new thing, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, there's some great practitioners out there, but you're right. Like I can't be the pelvic on femoral guy that gets stale after a point. And just to pull the curtain back on social media, like I'm getting analytics on the click rate. So how many people are clicking on our reels? And when I say reels, I mean my reels, not the Softlete reels. And what's the drop off? So how long do they stick around for? And Instagram heavily weights a reel that is 15 seconds long over a reel that is 50 minutes or 50 seconds long.
Okay.
Which is fucking depressing, dude.
Yeah.
That is so depressing, which makes me think I need a BBL and maybe some breast implants, you know.
Never hurt.
Yeah, it doesn't hurt, man. I'm trying to.
What did you, man? You were talking about that last time about falling, quote unquote, falling asleep by accident with the cups on.
Oh yeah. Exactly.
Maybe that's the way to go.
You know what? I could do that. See, this is the thing that's fucked up, dude. When you say that, I could probably like get some purple permanent marker and draw a circle on my chest. No, and that's gonna get clicks, dude.
Extreme cupping.
Yeah, right, exactly. Which is so fucking yeah.
You probably don't want to Google that. I imagine that if you're on a government computer, I probably wouldn't Google extreme cupping. That's going to open up a whole.
Sounds very
questionable.
No. Coach G and Matt said to look it up.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like it's getting a little faster. I don't think it's like night and day difference, but yeah, the pelvic on femoral stuck around for like a month, and then it kind of fell out of favor. Then now I'm seeing T-spine, and T-spine's only been around a couple weeks, but it's also my algorithm, which is weird. I've noticed a shift in the algorithm, so maybe that's it too.
Okay.
I don't know. It's weird. I don't
so
know.
What?
So,
sorry, just kind of
go ahead.
Potentially as a ramp into what we're going to discuss next. Is there anything, rather than just being again your men bitching, is there anything that you're like really excited about that you kind of see, you feel that's like fresh and kind of on the scene at the moment you're trying to get your teeth into? And it doesn't have to be, I know you read a crazy amount outside of S&C, like you said. So is there anything like outside or inside like the industry that you're really excited about that you want to kind of wrap your head around?
Dude. Okay, there's two things where my head goes that I want to pay attention to. So one thing was I saw it, man. I gotta look this guy. Give me a moment, dude. I gotta look this guy up because it was fucking nuts. This talk that was like Cyborg Guardians. It was a fucking lame ass name for this presentation. Cyber Guardians, ASU. Hold on. Give me a moment. Why is it not popping up now? Let me. So anyway, I saw this guy speak through ASU, and it fucking blew my mind. I was so out of my depth. Different email. Let me use Firefox. I felt like a worm. I felt like I had been waiting. You know, you meet somebody and you're like, this guy is on a different he's not even the same fucking solar system. He's in a different galaxy. ASU. Because I got to read you his fucking title, dude. It was fucking wild. All right, there it is. All right, where is it? Zina. Giordano. Got his name. I'm going to look up ASU. Hold on, sorry. Cyborg Guardians. There it is. Took some digging. Okay, so as far as what I'm excited about. So there's two things that came to mind. The first thing, things that are outside of my domain of expertise, things that are not immediately relevant or hard to predict as far as the relevance for right now in my day-to-day. I got to see Dr. James Giordano present to ASU on, let me read the name of this presentation, Ethical Frontiers of BCIs in Military Contexts. BCIs, brain-computer interface. So Neuralink and having like electronics in, I'm a cyborg now. So anyway, who is Dr. Giordano? He is a director, and I'm reading this, it's fucking hilarious. The director of the Center for Disruptive Technology and Future Warfare of the Institute for National Strategic Studies at the National Defense University.
Wow, that's a job title.
Yes, and like I said before, like this gentleman, when I'm watching him speak, it was hard to keep up. And I was supposed, for me, that's the kind of course I like, because that's how I want to teach. If I am barely keeping my nose above water, in my mind, inevitably, I'm going to learn to swim. I'm going to pick up more. Even though right then and there, like from an overload standpoint, let's think about progressive overload. That's what's happening. It's like I'm right at the threshold, and as a result of that, let's say theory or experience, I will become a better practitioner. Now I understand more about bioethics and brain-computer interfaces and the questions that poses 15 years from now, 10 years from now. What the fuck am I talking about? Well, if you're a fucking super soldier, like we have to ask the questions of what does that mean when you're done with service? How do your peers view you? That kind of shit. Like really interesting questions to me to ask.
Yeah.
Now, is it relevant for my day-to-day? Not necessarily, but I know I've changed my mental model. I shifted it somehow that's incalculable, and it will change the way I do things, regardless.
Yeah. Well, I think any of that stuff I'd kind of argue that actually it is critical, because again, that kind of the GWAT era of athlete, of kind of personnel, like within Softly, we still have a lot of those guys. That's the core of our kind of customer base, because that's kind of the era that Brent and the guys started the company. But you're starting to see this next generation come through, and that's very likely going to affect their careers. So as human performance interventionists, coaches, however you want to kind of define us, like it's on us to start. If we know the trajectory, if we know kind of the end point potentially that we're going to be looking for, we've got to start factoring that in to prep for that. We can't, like we always kind of talk about, we can't prep this new generation coming through, and it's not just military and law enforcement and fire and stuff. We can't prep this new generation as a kind of, well, this is what worked for us, this is what worked in 2010, so we'll just use the same approach now. It has to keep evolving.
I think that's a great way to look.
I think knowing where you're going, like, okay, we know that in 10 years this stuff's going to be a reality, so what does that look like 5 years from now? What does that look like today? Like, what stepping stones do we need to set up?
You know what, that helps me. I guess that's what we're talking about, is remaining an everlong student, because we can get fixed. We were talking about the guy who does Westside Barbell for his body comp athlete. Like, I don't ever want to be in a position where, and it always pissed me off, it pisses me off now, when people, civilians, so to speak, denigrate our current military service members to my face and be like, oh, our military saw him. Like, yo, I fucking work with them all the fucking time. Why the fuck what do you have? What body of work or experience that you have that gives you this opinion? And it's usually fucking nothing, but I don't know, I can get on my soul. It pisses me off. But we have to recognize that it's a different world. And that's not to say that because the candidate that you're working with is soft. It isn't. They're a reflection of the current environment and where we're headed. It's different. It's a different beast.
I think that's the key. Yeah.
Yeah, and I can't, it is myopic. I will lose them. Like, let's say if I'm in charge of a unit, and I will, sure, the GWAT guys will be on board with the way I run things as far as the GWAT experience. But I think over time, I'll start to lose these younger guys because I'm refusing to adapt my worldview. I'm not even saying change what I do. I'm just saying adapt my worldview. And I think that's one of the, as far as where I'm at in the space now, a lot of the courses kind of reflect this. Well, what else is out there that can help me augment what I do for service members? And dude, the fact that we're talking about brain-computer interfaces for the military, it is going to happen. It's fucking nuts. But I don't want to be the guy that's like, what happened? Like, clearly they're talking about it now. So
yeah. And we know, like, certainly with like, as more and more tech comes into tactical, whatever that looks like in your particular specialization, rapidly the human is becoming the weak link in that. Like, your ability as an operator to be able to process that information and make decisions, that's kind of the lag factor now. And so obviously one side of the coin is we can kind of hope that the tech developers can make that information more accessible, and like when you think of kind of old-fashioned night vision, like how much that's evolved.
Oh my goodness.
You know, like, so one side of the coin is, okay, we can wait for the technology to kind of improve so that it's easier to use. But surely is kind of within human performance, it's massively on us to, well, what can we do from the athlete side of things to accelerate how effectively they can utilize that? And that's not just spend more time doing that thing. That's like, so for one of the things I've been kind of kicking around with a lot with our programming is this idea of like looking at vision. So how quickly can you process things in front of you? Maybe a near, say, as an example, like near and far. So can you look at something really close, look at something at the distance, and like process the information that's coming from both things? So like if you're on scene, can you look at like a screen, a readout? Can you then look down range? Can you look at the building, the suspect, whatever it is you're looking at, and process those two different information streams? Sweet. Now can you do that under the stress, the artificial stress that we can impose by elevating heart rate, elevating breathing, making you do something quickly, like in a race? I think that side of things is kind of really where we have to go within this sector.
Okay, so now I'm wondering, like, if it's even worth you speaking to it, because I know there's detractors that are like, well, that's too fringe. But as far as your opinion, how do you dictate whether or not focusing on vision and going down that rabbit hole, why is it relevant when at the end of the day your job is about manipulation of force? Can you tell me like about your thought process and decision making there?
Yeah.
For the listeners, I guess what I'm saying is, to be reductive, when do you go for the weird shit versus fundamental?
Yeah, I was just going to say that. I think it's definitely worth pointing out that the big blocks, if you like, that we play with are still, can we get you stronger? Can we get you more durable? Can we like increase your aerobic capacity? They're still the big chunks, and that's reflected in the programming. But I think more and more, we're kind of, to your point earlier, we're kind of getting a handle on that. We're pretty good in our understanding of human physiology now. And I say we as in like the industry, we're pretty good in our understanding of this kind of stuff, that we can see improvements in velocity at VO2 max relatively predictably. We can see improvements in strength. Max speed is still a tough one, but we're getting much better at that kind of stuff. But the problem we have with a lot of these things is they're largely artificial. They're gym-based metrics, or even your 8-mile, 12-mile ruck time is arguably artificial. It's not what happens in real life ops. So the value, I think, of these small pieces, things like vision, things like vestibular training, things like motor learning, are like bridging that gap between what we can do in the gym, in the training environment, and what happens in real life. And that's something I think strength and conditioning in the elite sport world is still grappling with. And I think with our kind of 10 years behind in tactical, like that's exactly the same. And I think those kind of things they're real opportunities to push this forward and help close that gap between what we do in training and what we do in real life.
You bring up the 10-year gap. I think you're right there. I get frustrated with the field in general when they look at tactical athletes as somehow different. And because they're different, they don't benefit as much. So, like, to segue into unless you want to stay here, but to segue into our next topic, we wanted to talk about force, specifically types of strength, starting strength, explosive strength, and reactive strength, and what the fuck are those? I remember midway through my time at Exos, I taught my first co-course with a gentleman, and we went over to AS Roma, which is a football club in Italy. That's international football, not American football.
Soccer.
But when we were ramping things down, and he's like, and I'm talking about acceleration mechanics for the tactical athlete, and he's like, oh, well, it's not relevant. It's not the same. Like, firstly, he's a fucking civilian. Why the fuck would he know that? And secondly, like, it was misguided. There's this disconnect with civilians, for lack of a better term, sport coaches, and their understanding of the tactical environment. I don't understand, because for me, it was very clear that if I improve your sprint mechanics, I improve the amount of force that you can displace using your body, which means that when you're wearing kit, the rules still apply. The angles and shapes will change, but I made a faster athlete, so therefore, with the kit, you will be faster. But for some reason, sports coaches don't see the connection. I don't understand where their head's at when it comes to that.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think when I bring that up?
Yeah, well, I was from a swimming background. The argument, and we were super behind, I think, at the time in the UK. And the argument was always like, well, that's not what swimmers do. That doesn't work in the pool. A power clean, a strict press, that doesn't look like what your freestyle or your butterfly stroke looks like. So why should you do it? And without wanting to go off the deep end, we talk a lot in strength and conditioning about the laws of dynamic correspondence. And it's basically how well does the exercise or the movement that you're prescribing translate to the outcomes you're trying to get. And there's 5 kind of considerations, if you like, 5 different considerations in dynamic correspondence, and one of which is that they look the same. So if that's the only lens that you're using, you're leaving a lot on the table. And I think that's exactly the same in tactical. I know you and Brent were laughing a few months ago about the weighted pistol. I don't remember like the details of it, but basically it was it plate loaded, like a pistol that you could
No, that's Sorinex. It's a pistol attachment. If memory serves, there's a little where the magazine would go in the pistol. There's a little eyelet there, and you hook up your cable machine to that or your hand.
Okay. Yeah. So as a for instance, that would be okay if I'm practicing drawing from a holster with a cable or with a band using that attachment, that checks off one of the laws of dynamic correspondence. Okay, that kind of looks like what I might do in real life. But again, you're missing all the other stuff. And that kind of circles back to what we were talking about before, about those big blocks. You're probably way better off working on rate of force development, explosive strength, it kind of goes back to that side of things.
I know other people are going to ask, what are the 4 other components.
Oh, Jesus, now you put me on the spot. I haven't touched this in years. This is like super training, kind of Verkhoshansky, if you're interested in getting into this stuff. And I might have to lean on G because I haven't got any notes in front of me, so I'm just trying to think. One, I think, is, so the fact it looks like it, the fact that it happens in the same time domain as the movement that you're trying to, or the sport performance movement you're trying to improve. I think the force profile is the same. So if you're trying to develop horizontal force expression, so think throwing a punch, the fact that the movement expresses force horizontally, so something like a bench press, even though you're laying on your back and you're pressing up, that transfers to a punch because that's the same force vector. So what have I got? 3?
Okay. Yeah, you got 3. I'm looking at...
we talk about rate?
One is really specific, dude.
Help me out.
Type of muscular contraction.
Okay.
So concentric versus eccentric.
Yeah.
So can you explain that for the listeners?
Yeah. So if you are trying to improve something like, let's say, kicking a field goal. See, I'm getting all American. The act of kicking, the act of striking that ball is going to be concentric. This is quite reductionist, but we'll stick with it. So if you're following that law of dynamic correspondence, the movement should be concentric bias. So you should be doing, as in like the muscles are shortening under tension.
So imagine...
it's so easy to get in the weeds on this. I'm trying to keep this...
I'm thinking of a soccer ball. So kicking a soccer ball versus receiving one.
Yeah. Yes. So if you use that as an example or as an illustration for this, this is clumsy. Forgive me. If you think of a knee extension machine, a leg extension machine, concentric is going to be you straightening your leg under tension to lift the weight. So that is going to be under this law of dynamic correspondence, more like kicking. Whereas if you were to lower the weight, so if your legs out straight, your knees out straight, and you let your knee drop, you let your knee bend, that's going to be more like receiving the pass.
Yeah. And then that's good, man. That's good. No, another way I was thinking about it is like tackling someone versus being tackled.
Yeah. That's a cool one too.
It's a gross one. And then the last one was dynamics of effort, or the timing of force production, which sounds very similar to where force is produced, which you already mentioned. But dynamics of effort, in my mind, is coordination. Yeah,
if you want to kind of roll into that, that's a phenomenal segue into your kind of reactive strength, starting strength, absolute strength.
Great. Okay.
Type discussion.
Yes, let's do it. So anyway, all that being said, specific adaptation and imposed demand, that applies to everything. So and to sum everything up, if you look at combine performance compared to actual sport performance in American football, bench press has less than a 2% correlation to performance on the field. Why the fuck do we do it? We do it because it's tradition. Yes.
Talk about the law of dynamic correspondence.
So the 3 types of strength, dear listeners, that I want you to be aware of are starting strength, explosive strength, and reactive strength. Now, inside of that, what are those? It's how much force you can express per window of time. So starting strength is how much force you can show in greater than 250 milliseconds. Very easy to think. How much force can you show in a little over a quarter of a second? Explosive strength is between 150, and there's obviously wiggle room here, there's fuzzy, but here I'm seeing 170 to 250 milliseconds, that window of time for explosive strength. And then reactive strength is under 170 milliseconds. I've seen literature that says 150 milliseconds. So when I see a 170, I think that's kind of weird because usually I'm used to 150. But 150 milliseconds is a tenth of a second, faster than the blink of an eye. So what is this? Well, I want you to imagine yourself sprinting across 20 yards. Starting strength is that first 5 to 15 yards, depending on how elite you are. The longer your acceleration phase, the more force you have to generate, the more time you have to do it. So braking acceleration. So what I mean by that is the first 3 to 5 steps, how much force, you can think about it from a momentum standpoint, Newton's law of, motion, one of his laws of motion where, oh my goodness, dude, what is happening to me? I know this. This is freaking every day for me. Object at rest must stay at rest unless an external force reacts upon it. See, I didn't even have to, that was so weird. There was like a disconnect there. But anyway, you're trying to break momentum. And because of that, your feet are going to be on the ground longer. Okay, so think of the first 3 steps in your acceleration phase. So how much force can you generate in that? Starting strength. The book, for example, in my mind is kind of like, if you think about it, 5 by 5 makes sense. You're like, your feet are on the ground a long time. It's about strength above everything else. We don't care about time. Olympic lifting, not part of starting strength. Then when we get into explosive strength, that's that middle phase. So after 5 to 10 to 15 yards, like you're starting to transition. That's actually what we call the transition phase, where you're beginning to get a more vertical, upright posture. That's explosive strength. And then the last one, reactive strength. Picture in your mind, 100-meter race with elite level. Usain Bolt, when he was a fucking demon on the track. It looks like he's got an extra gear that everyone else does not have. It's an optical illusion, because I think everyone would agree, everyone on the Olympic stage at that Olympic level is fucking fast. It's that they're starting to, he is more efficient. He's able to demonstrate more force with that foot contact for a tenth of a second than his peers. I'm being simplistic when I say that. It's not that he's faster, it's just that he's hanging on to his speed a little bit better. Better being the key word there. Everyone else is slowing down. It's not slowing down, they're less efficient. So anyway, the reason I bring this up is everyone should generally, you should be able to look at yourself just based on the training you've been doing, like, oh, what kind of athlete am I? What am I good at starting strength? Am I good at explosive? Am I good at reactive? I need to be good at all of them, but which ones am I best at? I can't remember the person. It was a few years ago. I think it was an NFL game. Wide receiver catches. It wasn't a wide receiver. It was like somebody else. It was a different position. He catches the ball. There's no one around him. He just has to keep running. He's gonna get a touchdown. And he fell, non-contact. He fell on his own. He wasn't hurt, but right then and there, when I saw that, I'm like, oh, he doesn't work on speed endurance enough. Not because he can't run he can, clearly. He's playing the game. But for whatever reason, his body wasn't able to handle that tenth of a second foot contact from foot to foot during that last phase of the sprint. And he fell. So you, listener, should be able to look at yourself and go, am I good at this? Here's an easy exercise, and perhaps I'll actually post this as a reel. I trained some rescue swimmers, and we were doing 300-meter shuttles, which is not uncommon for military now. And I had a camera set up at the cut, where they had to cut 50 yards.
Sorry, I was going to say, just real quick, for those of you who haven't done 300-meter shuttles, G, can you break down what that looks like?
Yeah, 50-meter interval. Okay, so you start, and if you've done a beep test, you kind of did that already, kind of. But you start running to the 50, and you change direction, you cut at that 50-yard line and come back. Now, this drives me crazy. As a coach, and I'm thinking about the real world, I don't give a fuck if you touch the line with your hand. I really don't. I care about your foot touching the line if I'm testing, but really the most important thing is, can you cut and make it look good? Or are you Scooby-Dooing it? I remember one of the people, and God bless him, softly reposted this guy running shuttles, but his technique was found wanting, very much so. And I could tell his explosive strength was not where I want it to be. Part of that is coordinated effort, like just technique aspects, which I know Brent and I have talked about filming some new content for this kind of stuff. Anyway, I bring that up because record yourself from the side cutting. Pay attention to how long it takes you to change direction and which side are you being even as far as your sides go. And then not only are you being even, do they look the same? I bet you they don't, unless you work on it on a regular basis. Think about how long your feet have to be on the ground, and for you to reposition to go the other direction, it should only take around a quarter second. If you're taking, half a second, that's too long. Too long. Now, I say that, and I know there's going to be somebody that listens to this. He says it needs to be short. And then they're going to do something fucking weird to make that work, right?
I'm going to say they're going to slow down so hard coming in.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
That's the other thing you see, isn't it?
Yes. You do weird shit. Yes, the time is important, but it's all the fundamental work that we have to do that kind of helps you with that. Anyway, I bring that up because I think tactical, if you think about all the kit you have to wear, and you had to put yourself in a bucket, starting a strength, explosive strength, reactive strength, you can see how you're wearing all this kit, you're going to slow down on the reactive standpoint, right? So it's just something I think everyone should be considering when they're training outside of kit. You need to know what kind of athlete you are, and then this is kind of leading into athletic profiling. How do we know? Well, you time yourself, a flying 20, and you take a look at how long does it take, how long is your drive phase or your acceleration phase? How long is your transition phase? How long is your absolute speed or speed endurance phase? Like, there's 3 sections of your sprint, and you need to take a look at all of them. To be simplistic, the longer your acceleration phase, the faster you will be. You also generate over 50% of your speed with the first 2 steps. I will say that if you need 4 steps to generate over 50% of your speed, you need to work on starting strength.
Yeah.
Right. Versus if you lose a lot of speed in that last split, that last third or half of the split, you need to work on reactive strength. And here's where the programming comes in handy. Military athlete focused heavily on the weight room aspects and early on. I'm sure they've adapted, but will get you strong as shit, but like lack of coordinated effort as far as coordination, lack of plyometrics, lack of speed. It was always fucking wait. So working on reactive speed, if you know that, oh, my endurance phase sucks, well, that's easy enough as far as single leg hops, single leg jump, box jumps, plyometrics on a single leg. You can see how that's analogous to reactive strength. My rear foot elevated split squat for 10 reps may not align or make sense for reactive strength. So, Matt, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I do agree. And I think an easy way, we might have talked about this before, so if we have, please forgive me. Again, I'm old. An easy way as well is to kind of look back at your own sporting athletic history. Like, what sports did you play in high school? Maybe if you played at college. Basically, if you were more drawn to like your powerlifting, kind of front row rugby, you might have to help me out, G, with what the equivalent of that is in American football. So kind of your tackles, like the guys that stand on the front, like protecting the quarterback, like linemen. Yeah. So if you're more drawn to those kind of sports or activities, that's probably more that.
Starting
like
strength.
G was talking about, that's your kind of starting strength, your ability to kind of produce force from a standing start, if you like, and generally they're going to be big force, but over a slightly longer period of time. And you see that with when you do things like jump tests. Generally, those kind of guys will be on the ground longer to kind of wind up and to get the jump, to get the height, as opposed to your and classically, not always classically, they're going to be slightly larger, slightly more muscular builds. Or are you more of an elastic, springy volleyball, basketball sprinter, those kind of athletes who are, again, this is reductionist, but who are going to be probably less muscular and more like tendon, more kind of springy and bouncy. If you can kind of bucket yourself into kind of one of those, that not only gives you some good insight into probably what you're naturally quite good at, but it might give you more insight into where your potential flaws or your potential gaps are in training. So if you're more muscular driven, like you like to kind of to back squat really heavy, but when it comes to jumping and sprinting, you kind of struggle a little bit relatively, you might find that you get more bang for buck out of doing more of that kind of plyo sprinty type stuff, and obviously vice versa. Now, this probably would be a different conversation if you're still a competitive elite sport athlete. It's that whole, did you choose the sport or did the sport choose you? Like, those metrics might be why you are really good at volleyball, basketball, powerlifting. But what we're talking about is kind of tactical application, where we kind of need you to be good at both. Like, we need you to be able to produce force very quickly, but there's going to be instances where you need to be able to just raw horsepower, you need to be able to put out a lot of force. So I think kind of like G was saying, figuring out where you're at, where your strengths, where your weaknesses are, can be a really useful step in kind of that profiling piece, figuring out where to go next with your goals in mind.
Yeah, in my head, it's also insurance policy, because you're going to be presented with a scenario where you must express. And I'm thinking of linemen of today versus linemen of the 90s, where it wasn't unusual to see a really fluffy lineman in the 90s in the NFL, whereas today it's not uncommon, but it's definitely less common than it used to be. And if you're wondering what I'm talking about, like, just go look up combine 40-yard dash of any of the, let's say, first-round draft pick linemen. Oh my God, dude, it's fucking terrifying. And I've seen this in real life, too. It's fucking terrifying to have a 300-pound dude moving that fast. And it's okay. They're still very competent. They're first-round draft picks. So I guess the argument is, even if you're a bigger guy, there's nothing inherently wrong with you working on speed endurance and speed endurance technique, because you're still going to be this fucking machine. And isn't that good? Don't you want both? Don't you want to be a big, nasty dude that can move fast? And it is possible. I saw it every day at Exos while I was there, which is, again, it's fucking terrifying. Watching Richie Incognito, here's the cool thing too. Like, when you do that, you create a more robust athletic profile, and you're going to see these guys stay in longer. Now, we talked about, I believe we talked about the athlete performance paradigm. It's a concept that I know Peter Attia talks about from a longevity standpoint, where when you're younger, you have high physicality, but lower expertise. And over time, those two lines intersect. Well, with most normal people and in the sporting community, that line intersection is where they have to make a decision. Do I hang up the jersey or not? And good physical preparation is about extending the physicality as long as possible. Well, with the military first responder community, there is no, oh, let me hang up I mean, unless it's not your choice. But generally speaking, you stay in despite injuries, etc. So for me, it's about creating a more robust athlete. If I can expose you, I'm not saying, and I think, Matt, you would agree, we're not saying, oh, you're a lineman body type, so therefore you should be doing speed endurance training. That's stupid. No, it's just we do enough of it. There's also the notion that we didn't really talk about is left versus right side in symmetry. And generally, I would say we don't want to see a difference, a 15% difference. What do I mean by that?
Do you mean when you're like, are we talking about that shuttle again, or do you just mean generally?
Yes, talking about the shuttle, but in general as well. But when I say general, I mean absolutely general, like just raw human being. So when I say general, I'm not talking about marksmanship, shooting with your offhand. I'm talking about sprinting and sprint ability, change of direction. So during that shuttle, we can record, there's a drill called the 505, which, Matt, I think we need to integrate at some point. But 505 is much simpler than 510-5. 510-5 has some skill components to it, skill that's relevant to American football. And when I say relevant, I mean it's its own thing. Whereas a 505 is, in my opinion, just a change of direction test, period. So you run through a gate, you cut facing one way, that's one test complete. Then you go back in, you cut facing the other direction. You can measure the difference between those two speeds, and that's going to tell me how you're able to decel on one leg versus the other. If I see a difference of greater than 15%, we need to work on that. 10% is yellow flag. It's like of concern, but it's not necessarily something I'm really attached to, because in a sport like my head's going to a baseball team that I was working with, they're asymmetric athletes, that's okay. So generally 15% was where I was most concerned, 10% not so much because it's baseball. Now for tactical, I would say, especially for longevity reasons, I would want to pay attention to that 10% and bring that down to like sub 5 if I can.
And it's probably going to be part of a bigger picture kind of like profile in terms of, I'm guessing you're kind of thinking injury risk.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah. So I like putting it as part of a, like a kind of a battery of assessments.
Yeah.
And like if you're seeing that asymmetry like consistent, absolutely, that's kind of worth exploring. And I think anytime that's something you can kind of do really easily. Anytime we have a unilateral work in the training, which happens fairly frequently, rather than just kind of being blinded into, well, I've got to beat Ryan on the leaderboard, I've got to get to the top. Have a think, like plug in. Well, how does my left side feel versus my right in terms of, we'll use your rear leg elevated split squat or Bulgarian split squats, like in terms of just the absolute weight. What does it feel like? Can I don't know, does 50 kilos feel the same on the left versus the right? Like, am I able to move it as quick? But even things like, well, how stable does this feel? How do my hips feel? Kind of trying to unpick some of that stuff can be quite interesting. And then especially when you start connecting the dots to other movements. Okay, I noticed that my left leg doesn't feel so strong in this rear leg elevated split squat when it's the kind of the ground leg, the working leg. And then when I cut off that left leg in a change of direction drill, weird stuff happens. I'm not as as sharp. You know, when you start kind of piecing things together, and that again, we're trying to help you guys find blind spots in your training, like things you didn't know. That can be a really useful avenue to explore. And we're not saying, again, big blocks, little blocks, like we talked about the division training. We're not saying, okay, strip out, discount all the strength stuff you're doing and just focus on getting really good balance and being able to dip on one leg. Keep all that stuff in, but just pay more attention to it and try and kind of unpick it. And I agree with you. I think longevity is with service careers now, whether you're military or first response, longevity is the key. Like, you have to be able to survive the reps.
Yeah, I can't remember her name. Gold medalist sprinter, 100 meter, Marion, I think is her name. But
what kind of era?
Early 2000s, I want to say. Let me see. Marion, sprinter.
Was she linked with Bauker?
Marion Jones.
Yeah.
So
a little bit tainted, I think.
Yeah, I love her social media profile because she like posts like the real side of the consequences of being at that level. Like, her knees are fucked, dude. And that's what I'm thinking about for military service members. Like, not now, but like what happens in 5-10 years.
Yeah.
So much so that Brent got a meniscectomy. But anyway, there's a couple things. So easy test for you to do at home. Very simple is something called a broad hop. Matt, are you familiar with a broad hop?
Yes.
Yeah, so you take off. So I'm standing here. I'm going to do a counter movement jump, but one leg. So I'm going to take off. I'm going to load. So both my feet are on the ground. I'm going to load my left leg. My right leg is in the air. And I'm going to jump forward and land on two legs. So it's a broad jump, but a single foot takeoff to a double foot landing. So I can measure the distance between my left side versus right side. Now that's telling me linear, so something to keep in mind, but that's a very simple test that I can do to measure its
fairly frequently. We triple hop was like one of our exit criteria in rehab.
Yeah.
And it's the same kind of concept, but rather than just one, you're doing 3 hops. And you can, that's great. It just gives you a little bit more information. It's definitely not a better test. I'm not trying to trump you. I'm just as another option for people. Because obviously you can look at that left versus right, absolute. So how far did you get with 3 hops? You can look at what was your first hop?
Jump on that real quick? What I love about the triple hop is think about starting explosive versus reactive strength. That's closer to explosive and reactive strength than it is to starting, at least first, right?
Yeah. And
broad hop is a single jump.
Yeah, and you've got like a ton of the motor control stuff. So this is, I don't know, if you're thinking like ACL recons or like lateral ankle sprains, things like that. The strength and the power piece is pretty important. But really, you kind of need the control there as well. Otherwise, you're just asking for re-injury down the line. And we know you're already going to be like elevated risk of that. And that kind of comes back to what we've been talking about, I guess, through a lot of this is not just, well, what's the raw data? What's the raw numbers? Like, how fast do you do the drill? How much weight do you put out? It's like, how do you complete that? How do you execute that? It doesn't necessarily have to be Instagram reel perfect in terms of your movement, but you want to be paying attention to what does that look like? What's your level of control on your left versus your right?
Yes, and then so further, you mentioned ankle level of control. That's the other thing that Matt and I would be looking for. Going back to the shuttle again, how much of the symmetry or asymmetry is there because of limitations in your right, like maybe you tore something in your ankle. So then you'll have to maximize everything else above and below the joint to make up for that. And you may be in a position where you just are not going to get to that 5% or below difference. So you have to be pragmatic when you consider that. So things I look at first, just now we're kind of not off track, it's definitely related, but things I'm looking for with your change of direction. Are you able to get the requisite amount of ankle dorsiflexion, the requisite amount of tibial rotation, the requisite amount of hip internal rotation? Does your torso angle relatively match the loaded leg when you're cutting? So meaning like my trail leg is not really loaded all that much. It is, so you're not jumping into the cut. Both legs are loaded, but I'm definitely loading the inside leg first, the leg that's towards the direction I'm about to travel back to. And I'm looking at that as a kind of like a squat, a really sexy squat. And how does that look? I mean, does it look like dog shit? Does it look like you know what you're doing? And so as far as that, let's say qualitative aspect versus just the raw numbers of starting explosive and reactive strength.
Yeah, that stuff's great. And I think like it's, again, we talked about kind of the law of dynamic correspondence. I think it's really easy in tactical to think, well, my job doesn't look like my job doesn't look like changing direction like that. So why is this relevant? Why is this of interest? And
slipping in the shower.
Yeah.
That's reactive. So yeah, just for listeners, that's to me like, yes, it's so easy. It's a fucking pride thing. It's like, this is shuttles aren't relevant for my job. You slipped in the fucking shower before.
Yeah.
Very nice night on the town. Too much to drink. You slipped off the curb before. You're in Korea, so you gotta be on your best behavior. Like that's, to me, that's where this shit shows up.
Yeah, and kind of similar to a lot of the GPS data we get in sport, where if you just kind of crunch average speed or max speeds across like a 90-minute game, that's going to tell you one thing. But if you look at the kind of the quote unquote key moments, so moments around scoring goals, scoring a basket, whatever, arguably that the data there is more important because they're important parts of the game. And I think it's the same thing. Sorry, this is clumsy. I'll get there. I think it's the same thing with kind of tactical. Like we spend a lot of time in law enforcement, fire, in military. We spend a lot of time kind of standing around or moving relatively slowly, long distances with weight. But like the crunch moments when shit goes down, when you've got incoming rounds, when you're dragging someone out of a burning building, whatever it might be, a lot of those kind of moments revolve, even though they're less frequent in time and normally shorter in duration, they revolve more around the stuff that G's talking about, like that ability to be able to kind of express force rapidly in weird kind of positions and planes and change direction. Those critical moments look more like that kind of stuff than 12 8-mile rucks, and I'm not saying that 12 8-mile ruck isn't important, but I'm saying that like generally those key moments are more explosive, ballistic, unknown in nature or ambiguous in nature.
Rucking isn't going to solve your sprint problem.
Yeah.
Right. No, that's a great way to look at it. All right, man. Well, I feel like I have no fucking clue what we're going to talk about next week. But what are your thoughts? Any parting thoughts?
Yeah, we've kind of been around the houses, I guess. Just in terms of the to touch back on what we were talking about at the start, like the courses and things like that, trying to decide whether something is a decent return on investment. I think the same thing can be said for your training. So we said about, like, you have to be able to make sure that what you're getting out of the course is worth your time. So if it's something that you're already very, very skilled at, you're probably going to need to go to something that's kind of at a very challenging level. And that might be quite difficult to find in order to kind of keep pushing it forwards. But if you go to something like G did, that's kind of maybe relevant, but a little bit out of your main area of focus, you might find even something that's relatively low level, like a high school or a community. What do you call it? What's under a bachelor's here? Like an associate degree? Is that what that's called? Yeah. So as a strength and conditioning coach, you might have to go to do a PhD to get that, like, point at the tip of the spear, that little bit more information on how you improve your 2K, how you improve an athlete's 2K row performance. But if you do an associate's degree in psychology, that the information you glean from that might have just as much relevance as spending how many thousands of dollars that PhD is going to cost, but you're getting slightly different things out of it. Bear with me, this is clumsy and a bit of a reach, but I'm getting there. I think the same thing can be said for your training. If you're already very, very proficient at your 300-yard shuttle, spending more time on improving that 300-yard shuttle might be a very valiant thing to do, but it's going to cost a lot of time, a lot of energy to just get those, like, 1-2% improvements. But if you were to look at things you're deficient in, maybe single leg control, maybe your aerobic capacity, relatively, that's not going to take much time and energy to improve, but you might well still see an improvement in your 300 meter shuttle, like your kind of your goal output.
No, that's a so
yeah, that was a reach. Sorry.
No. That reminds me of an I just shared this analogy with the soldier I'm working with. So, and I know you know this analogy. Training, and I just guess education in general. Imagine imagine a toothpaste tube. Early on, if you don't know enough, if you don't know anything, or let's just stick with the training. You never trained before. I can use whatever fucking method I want, and we're gonna see adaptation. It's really easy. Newbie games. It's really easy to get adaptation as we squeeze this toothpaste out of the tube. But over time, you're gonna have to get more strategic with how we squeeze the toothpaste. It's gonna be stuck at the top, and you got to get really, targeted. And so it is here. Like, it's, at some point you are strong enough. Now we have to look at other things.
Yeah.
No,
agreed.
I feel like this is a great place to wrap. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say as well, as ever, if you have any questions on your goals, your programming, how to kind of get after the things you want to, feel free to get in touch with us. And I know G was kind of talking in jest about trying to think about topics for next week in future episodes, but just this is ideally, I don't want to step on G's shoes with this, but this is an organic kind of, if we can, a two-way street. So if you have things you want to talk about, if there's things you never want to hear about again, let us know, be it like on the team room, or if you want to contact G or I via email directly, we can try and factor that stuff in.
Thank you so much, Matt. Yeah, and then if you're wondering if we're going to get more guests, the short answer is yes, working on it. All right, you guys have a great day. I hope you took something from this episode. Die living.